Welcome to the Engaged Jain Studies Podcast, brought to you by Arihanta Institute. Listen to top figures in the fields of Jain studies, religious studies, vegan studies, and social justice discuss pressing issues of everyday relevance. Together, let's move beyond the realm of personal spiritual growth and connect philosophy, religion, and spirituality to the important task of caring for the well-being of society. Learn about your world and how to change it on the Engaged Jain Studies Podcast.
Welcome to the Engaged Jain Studies Podcast. My name is Agni Hogaboom, and today I am your guest host. I am one of the master's students in the Engaged Jain Studies program with Arihanta Institute and Claremont School of Theology. My research interests are post-capitalist constructions and resiliences, mutualist builds, including human and non-human animals, and deeply lived ecology. My guest today, you've met him before, is Professor Christopher Jain Miller, who is the director of the Center for Jain Yoga Studies. And we are here to talk about the Patañjali Yoga Sutra. So first, Chris, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Agni, and thank you for having me on the podcast today.
Yes, I was pretty excited when you reached out because, as you know, I've been studying this topic at some depth, and we probably have all kinds of listeners. So I'm wondering if you could just briefly explain what is the Yoga Sutra? What is Patanjali's Yoga Sutra?
So Patanjali's Yoga Sutra is a text that many of us maybe have heard of if we've done a yoga teacher training. It's often introduced in yoga teacher trainings and yoga classes, or at least yoga teachers talk about it. It's a 5th century yoga text that is encountered almost everywhere in the modern yoga world. It literally translates as something like the threads on yoga. The sutras is cognate with suture in English. So the sutures are the threads that kind of tie yoga together. And it's a set of short verses that basically summarize what yoga was around the 5th century CE. And it's written by Patanjali. This is the classical yoga of Patanjali, this course that I teach on it, that you've taken and that others have taken. And it really focuses on going through this text to understand how it brings together all of the different kinds of yoga practices and thoughts on yoga that were around in the 5th century of the Common Era. It's often given credit as being the text that sort of summarizes and systematizes yoga. And it's a place where a lot of people go when they want to start some kind of deep yoga studies and yoga philosophy and the history of yoga. Because if you know this text, you will be able to understand a lot of other things about yoga that are found elsewhere in other texts and other practices. And so the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali is a kind of short, concise summary of what yoga was and really shows us what it became all the way into the present. So text that I have a great passion about teaching and something that came to me at the beginning of my yoga journey as well.
I have so many questions about your yoga journey because I guess I'm just wondering, are you one of those people who came to yoga through asana, or was there a different path?
You know, a lot of people do come to yoga through asana, right? Through coming into a yoga studio. They feel good after practice, and the more they practice, they feel better. They connect with really nice, like-minded people and improve their lifestyle, and that's wonderful. So that's usually how people come to the Yoga Sutra. I interestingly came to it in another direction, in that I was really interested as a student of religious studies to study yoga and yoga philosophy. And I started studying yoga philosophy before I started doing asana really heavily. I had a lot of surfing friends in Southern California where I spent a lot of time in the water. And one of my friends, Ryan, who ended up being one of the founders of Glow, it used to be Yoga Glow, he told me one day, Chris, you have to try yoga. It's going to improve your surfing. And so all along the way, as I'm, learning about the Yoga Sutra and yoga philosophy, I then kind of got sucked in through that other avenue, through surfing, to go in and practice yoga. And then I started to appreciate asana practice as well, of course. But I think that puts me in the minority. Most people come to the Yoga Sutra and yoga philosophy after having practiced yoga for some time in a yoga studio or going through a yoga teacher training. And then they end up getting more deep into the philosophy, which is a lot of the people who I teach and who study with me, including yourself, right, who came to this after running a yoga studio for quite some time.
So you said the 5th century. So that means this text existed before the colonial encounter. Was it an important text? Was it like a major text? Can you give us a context of how the sutra moved in South Asia before colonial rule?
One of the most interesting things about this text that I soon discovered when I started reading about its history outside of the text itself is that this wasn't a text that necessarily had a practice lineage connected to it, a lineage of gurus and practitioners that goes all the way back to Patanjali, for example. In fact, Patanjali may have been a single author, it may have been a group of authors. We don't know exactly for sure. And this text was instead really a compilation of practices that had been gleaned from different religious traditions. Buddhism, many of us know Buddhism. Jainism, not so many of us know about Jainism. And then other sources that would be linked to what we would today call Hinduism. All of these different sources are compiled in there by the author or compilers, who may have been Patanjali or several authors. And it was important in the sense that it became a reference text for people to go to understand yoga, which is how I teach it today. It wasn't a text that, like many other texts, may have had lineages, practice lineages connected to it, or particular schools of thought connected to it, like a particular school, but it was really a bringing together of so many different religious traditions and practices into one text. And that's why it's so important as a kind of reference for understanding what yoga was and what it would become.
So in a sense, it's somewhat encyclopedic. It's somewhat of a reference manual, although it also is philosophy on its own. Especially there's like a handful of really important commentaries that people usually study alongside the 195 or 196 sutras themselves, right?
Yeah, that's right. So in the years that follow the 5th century, the commentators continued to write about this. So very prominent scholars, Sanskrit scholars, wrote commentaries about what the Yoga Sutra meant. And the first of those commentators, who may have actually been the same author writing under a different name, was Vyasa. And I usually teach the Yoga Sutra first and foremost with that one commentator's most original commentary in mind, because it was kind of a starting point. And then in the years that followed, there were other scholars who commented on it, but who didn't belong necessarily to a Yoga Sutra practice tradition. They found scholarly value in this text, in what it was summarizing and what it was teaching. And so when you read through Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, you're reading not just the verses, the sutras that you mentioned, the 195 or 196 verses. You're also reading what others have written about it all the way into the present. And so it's a text that has grown and evolved in its meaning over time. And this is a process that we bring to it as yoga teachers, where it remains kind of perennially relevant.
So I know the history is complex, but so we have this text in the fifth that emerges in the 5th century. It's a somewhat democratic text, and as someone who's studying it right now, it is possible to understand with care, right? It's a beautifully deep, study. But what and again, like, I know we don't have time to go into a deep dive, but how did this text end up in the West? Like, how is it the one text that most, for instance, yoga teacher trainings are going to refer to?
It's a very good question. It's a question that doesn't often get addressed really anywhere that I've seen, except in the yoga studies research that I read and that I write in. And it's a really interesting history. Many of us have heard of Swami Vivekananda, and if we haven't, that's okay. But he was a guru, a Hindu guru, who in 1893 came to the United States, to the Parliament of the World Religions, to teach Hinduism, to share the message of yoga that he had studied. And when he came at that kind of defining historical moment at the end of the 19th century, shortly after, he translated his own translation of a text that he called Raja Yoga. And that translation was actually his translation of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, the text we're talking about right now. This was the first time that the Yoga Sutra was really pulled out of India and even into Europe and then to North America. And it was the first time that Westerners, later in 1896, when he published this text, were really exposed to this text. what's interesting about it is that this text, because of him, became the sort of source text of yoga. And before that, it hadn't had this status. There was no lineage connected to it. Nobody was really even studying this text until around his time, very at that recent time. There was a handful of people who may have taken interest in it. But what happens there at the end of the 19th century is that this text, which had been largely forgotten in India, experienced a revival where people, particularly in Europe and in North America, became very interested in using it as a manual for understanding yoga and learning what yoga was supposed to be. And this was part of a big movement that was taking place in colonial India among the middle class, the Indian middle class and elites, where they were really remaking all of the cultural contributions of India into something that the so-called West could understand. So they made up new forms of dance like Bharatanatyam. They made up new forms of art and painting that combined Western methods with Indian subjects, for example. They made really beautiful music in India that combined Indian styles of music with Western instruments like the violin, the harmonium. All of these really wonderful things are happening during the colonial period in India where Indians are remaking their traditions in the face of Western imperialism and colonialism. And one of those things is yoga. And the Yoga Sutra itself finds itself as the source text on yoga, primarily because there was no lineage connected to it, and nobody could tell Vivekananda or anyone else if they were interpreting it right or wrong. And so this makes it a particularly interesting colonial object because it's to put it very bluntly and shortly, I would say that the Yoga Sutra is therefore a kind of colonized text that was appropriated and reappropriated, not just by Westerners, but even by Indians like Vivekananda himself, and then made into something totally new.
One of the things I'm fascinated with, because I've taken a course with you that went into a lot more depth about the colonial encounter and how democratic is yoga, how much has it been essentialized and romanticized in the West and all that. One of the questions I always wonder is for some of these people that were creating a following and having some success and introducing a text to an audience that was relatively, hadn't received anything like that before. I always wonder how sincere that individual was versus how much they were trying to market. And like that's a question even today, right? For any spiritual or philosophical or activist leader today. I always wonder about that stuff because marketing has always been important, right? Even before the internet.
The process you're describing is one that wasn't invented recently, right? And you're recognizing that even Vivekananda himself had to find an audience who would be receptive to his teachings. And even Vivekananda himself, interestingly, is quoted as having written that he was trading his brain for money in the United States. But I think he was doing it with sincerity. He was bringing this
Mhm.
text, Raja Yoga, to public audiences, and he wanted to teach and share with the world what he thought his best interpretation of yoga was. And so I think you can never separate these two things, right? Capitalism and spirituality. There was an artificial kind of colonial binary created between the mystic spiritual India and the capitalist wealthy materialist West. And we assume often that Vivekananda wasn't also someone who had to eat, had to have shelter. And so when he brings the text to the United States, he certainly admittedly himself was there to make money. He was trying to send money back home to help people in the anti-colonial struggle in India. But he was doing it with the fullest amount of integrity and discipline that he could. And I think that same dynamic applies all the way into the present. And so, for example, if you open up a yoga teacher training manual, you will often see some reference to the Yoga Sutra, even if it's only a minimal amount. In all the yoga teacher training manuals I've looked through over the years, I tend to see Yoga Sutra as mentioned there. And I think what that does is it tries to anchor whatever they're teaching in some kind of philosophical tradition and also fulfill some requirement to teach yoga philosophy in the training. And I think that that's done sincerely to try to share what people know about the text. And it's also done, of course, to try to anchor the training, the course, whatever it is, the workshop, in some form of ancient history. And so we see that happening all the way into the present, and appropriation has been taking place for as long as we can discuss. I mean, even in India, in pre-colonial India, thinkers were borrowing ideas from one another. And then you have Vivekananda borrow ideas from within this tradition, bring it to the West and say, you often hear that India's gift to the world is yoga. And so it's a
Hmm.
very complicated idea, I think, but it's true that you can never really separate the marketing, the capitalism from the text itself. It became part of that network very early on.
And even pre-capitalism, there was, royal patronage or, power dynamics. Like those weren't invented with the colonial encounter. So this Yoga Sutra emerges important in South Asia, important in the West. If it is somewhat an encounter of colonialism, if it is not not a highly lineaged text, for instance, why, to ask a hard question, I guess, why should we study it? Why shouldn't we look for something more lineaged or more niche or less potentially corrupted by Western interests?
We should, we can, and I think that we should do that. There are a lot of yoga texts across a number of South Asian religious traditions that deserve our careful study and attention. What I think is most interesting about Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, however, for someone who's just getting started out, is that it is recognized as being, as you mentioned, encyclopedic and being a sort of reference manual that helps us understand all of the other lineages, all the other texts,
Hmm.
and the ideas that they're drawing on. Because this text, Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, summarizes them so well, so succinctly, that when you read other yoga traditions or texts, or you listen to other gurus speak, the language they're using, the ideas that they're sharing, are more often than not, you can trace them back to something from the Yoga Sutra, either because they are themselves using the Yoga Sutra, or because there's a shared vocabulary that the Yoga Sutra captures that is recognized not only by Westerners and by imperialist forces and colonial forces who kind of colonized this text long ago, but also by Indian thinkers, not only Vivekananda, but others who tried to translate the text or who actually did translate the text during the colonial period, like Rajendralal Mitra is one other author I'm thinking of off the top of my head, who produced one of the first, if not the first, and really good translations of the Yoga Sutra. There's a kind of shared understanding among all these thinkers that if you want to understand yoga, this text is a great way to start, a great place to start, because so much of what you encounter elsewhere will make a tremendous amount of sense to you.
I just wanted to drop a brief comment that my first two collegiate yoga courses were with you, Professor Miller, and so this is my third course that I'm studying, and it's okay, I guess, to do things out of order because, while I wish I would have had more Patanjali under my belt before I took some of your other courses, I've been doing fine, and it's kind of cool to read things in the order that I have. I'm getting a lot of illumination right now this summer. I wanted to shift, I wanted to move forward in history and come to today. And this might be a tall order, but what would you say Patanjali's main message is in the Yoga Sutra that is relevant for life today?
Yeah, there's so much in there. But I think when I'm asked this question of like, what is it that we need to know, or what should we know? What's our takeaway from Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, especially today? I think I just start with his main kind of concern, which is that we all have a higher self, according to Patanjali. You can call it a soul if you want, a self, which he calls Purusha. And this is a part of us that is pure, that is free. It always has been free. And through it, when we experience that freedom, can bring a tremendous amount of insight into the suffering that we all experience together in this world, especially today, right? And so what Patanjali's text is trying to do is help us realize that self, because the world is full of so much suffering. And this is a universal, I think, from the time that he was writing his text, the world was full of suffering, all the way into the present. When we look around us today, the world is full of tremendous suffering. And so I think this is an important takeaway from the text. What makes it relevant is that what the text promises is some kind of experience of the self, either a glimpse of it or an even enduring presence of an awareness of the self that is within us. And that brings a tremendous amount of peace of mind when through these practices you are led to some kind of experience of that self and therefore are able to kind of tap into that kind of reassurance that no matter what happens here, everything's going to be okay. Now, at the same time, what I also find strikingly important on the opposite end of that is how much Patanjali's message, his main ethical message of nonviolence, is important on this path toward that experience I just told you about. Because in this text, as a starting point in his ethical framework, he says that nonviolence is the first thing we have to practice from an ethical perspective, ahiṃsā. Many of us have probably heard that word before, which also goes into the Jain tradition, the Buddhist tradition. And what he notes in the text and in the commentary is that what this means for us is that we are to injure no living being anywhere, anytime. Human or non-human, we are not supposed to injure anything. And so while we have this promise of this higher self in this world full of suffering, his ethical foundations also make us recognize that we can be part of the solution, that we can choose not to injure a being anywhere, anytime to the best of our ability. And then we should try. We should try to do that. And he also says that no one is exempt from this, no matter your social class, where you live, or the circumstances. We all have to commit to nonviolence to the best of our ability. And we can really see as violence is tearing our world apart right now that the Yoga Sutras kind of two of its core messages here. There are many great messages, but these kind of two core messages cannot be clearer or more, I think, more relevant to what it is that we see going all around the world, going on all around us all the time.
I often think when it comes to non-harm and the ahiṃsā ethic, that if people are honest, they'll admit that's how they want to be treated. I recently was exposed to Simone Weil's writings, and she has this quote: "At the bottom of the heart of every human being, from earliest infancy until the tomb, there is something that goes on indomitably expecting in the teeth of all experience of crimes committed, suffered, and witnessed, that good and not evil will be done to him. It is this above all that is sacred in every human being." I think that one reason I found Patanjali so helpful is that to see a text that is this old, that is this ancient, that has come to this truth of non-harm, and how do we start with non-harm, and what do we develop from there, is that makes sense to me because of the suffering in the world, and that people figured this out quite a long time ago, which is pretty cool, right? I was raised in the American public school system, and we were taught that Western Enlightenment is where we learned all of our good ideas, right? So really, really amazing stuff.
Yeah, what a beautiful quote too that kind of makes Patanjali feel even more relevant.
hmm And it's like a well, you can keep going back and studying deeper when you have new conflicts. So you had mentioned yoga teacher training. I have a couple of those under my belt. I don't know how many you've had, but yes, Patanjali is often referenced, but in a very glancing way a lot of the time. So what do you feel is most overlooked in present day yoga teacher training? So not in the academy, but kind of the bulk of people who are learning about and practicing yoga, and at least in the West.
Yeah, I think there's so much in this compact text to learn. And what I notice in modern yoga trainings when I go into them or when I'm asked to teach in them is that usually the eight limbs of Patanjali are covered, starting with the ethics that I just described to you from nonviolence, all the way through to samadhi, this kind of deep meditative absorption. Those are covered often in some detail, and if not, just kind of maybe glanced over. A lot of people come out of yoga teacher trainings realizing that there are eight limbs to Patanjali's practice, the Ashtanga, as it's called sometimes. And that's great. And that's an excellent starting point for beginning your yoga training and your yoga philosophy training. But what I would have to say is that around those eight limbs, which appear in the second out of four chapters in this text, There is so much philosophy, so much about yoga powers that is often always overlooked. You read about levitation and taking over other people's bodies and reading people's minds and all the interesting powers that supposedly emerge from certain yoga practices. Those are often always left out or overlooked in modern yoga trainings, as well as a lot of the engagement with particular religious ideas from Jainism and Buddhism and Hinduism. And I think all of these things, when you look at them in their totality, you realize that Patanjali was dealing with much more than just these 8 limbs. These 8 limbs were a kind of way, a means, a practical means to realize your higher self, to have yoga powers, to realize your social conditioning and how you became the way you are. There's a whole yoga psychology built into the text. There's a whole yoga philosophy built into the text. And I feel like that kind of nuance and the commentaries as well that have been written about this text, those are the things that often get left out in modern yoga trainings. And I just wish when I go in to do workshops on this, I just wish that more time would be spent and dedicated, because the study of this text itself is a yoga practice. And in fact,
Mm.
one of the other philosophies underpinning it that I don't want to have time to go into right now is Sāṃkhya philosophy. And this is a form of what's known as jnana yoga, the yoga of knowledge, which basically says that alongside other things like practicing your asanas and your pranayama and all your meditation, that study and knowledge itself becomes a form of yoga practice. And so that's why I think it's just so important to incorporate more of this into yoga teacher trainings everywhere that I go. And I think yoga teachers often just absolutely fall in love with this text, and then they go on and study other things as well afterwards because they're so well equipped with the vocabulary and the knowledge that this text brings together so nicely.
I have been delighted with how almost every sutra is I love it. Like there's one or two where I'm like, it feels a little dense. I'm still working through it. So I would say this material can seem intimidating to someone who maybe has just taken a YTT or has read a few books, like who is definitely interested in deeper study. So why should like what does your course offer that might provide something that they can't get from ChatGPT or that they can't get from reading blogs or following a YouTube channel?
But yeah, so I think, the Yoga Sutra is technically kind of available to everyone. You can go find multiple versions of it online, PDFs, even just websites that translate and comment on this text. And I think that's a beautiful thing because there's so many different interpretations of this text, contemporary interpretations of this text. So if you are intimidated, I wouldn't even encourage people just to go look at some of those and see how they feel when they read them. I think what's important, however, when you're studying them is to study it within an environment of yoga studies. And when I say that is those who have themselves studied the text deeply, even academically, for years, and at the same time, critically, have a kind of lived experience from practicing what is in the text. And I think what will probably come out of that study for people, or what I've experienced, is that yes, ChatGPT and yes, websites and translations can tell you things about the Yoga Sutra. But when you see how this text is connected to not only the instructor's lived experience, but the lived experience that the yoga teachers and the yoga practitioners see in it when they study it for the first time deeply, it becomes illuminating. You will suddenly,
Mm.
I think, see yourself and your own experience in the text when kind of walked through it slowly but surely, through what at times may feel a little bit intimidating. Yes, there is some dense philosophy in there, but it's the job of the teacher and the instructor through lived experience, through practice, to be able to try to break that down. And so that's what I try to do in my own approach, is to cover it academically, historically, philosophically, but also always grounding it in some reality of my actual experience or in human experience. And the reason for doing that is I want to allow the students like you, Agni, and those who have studied to feel how this text relates to their own experience. Because in fact, the highest form of knowledge in this text is your first person experience. That is the highest form of knowledge that you can have. One of the other forms of knowledge, according to the text, is training with someone who you trust because of their credentials. And so while a guru or a teacher or a professor can tell you what this text means, you have to read it ultimately through with them, but then come to your own conclusions. And that's the kind of pedagogical approach I take, to not intimidate, but to invite students into the text, to let it sort of illuminate and elaborate their own lived experience, both on the yoga mat, off the yoga mat, in their lives, very broadly speaking, because that's certainly how I was trained in it, and that's certainly what it has done for me. So it's given me a lot of insight into a lot of my own psychology, a lot of my own human and life experience, and that's how it should be. It should be transformative, revealing, and sometimes it should make us a little bit uncomfortable, and I think that's where the growth actually takes place.
I love that. And I have really been enjoying the definitions and expounding on what is direct experience, what is error, what is conjecture or imagination. I've returned to those handfuls of sutras and commentaries multiple times recently, and it is incredibly rewarding study. And like you say, it's study while you're living your life. So it's directly in a, dialogue. And I also just want to say one of the reasons I audited a course of yours last term was because I do think you're very good at providing thoroughly researched, careful presentation of material, but also making it more accessible to people. So I've been telling my social media that this is an opportunity to study with you. I think you're an excellent professor. So I'm looking forward to taking the course again. I wanted to bring, as we're sort of moving towards close, I wanted to bring us into some of the discussions that I see in the activist world, the organizing world, the sort of engaged world of people who are trying to make the world a better place and who have found themselves interested in yoga studies. First of all, you have touched upon lineage, right? And it seems there's this tension between lineage versus a democratic text. Do you believe that yoga study is available to anyone who wants to take it? And how would someone know if they're ready to study this content?
Yeah, I think I mentioned before that I do think it's technically available to all. And this is why I try to teach it periodically when I have time. The last time I taught this course in this detail was 4 years ago, actually, from when we're recording right now. And I've been wanting to teach it again because we have such a wonderful experience in that. And so part of what we're trying to do at Arihanta Institute, and specifically through the Center for the Study of Jain Yoga, is to democratize these studies, to democratize the yoga studies, to make it more widely available to an audience who wouldn't otherwise have access to either a trained yoga teacher in a yoga studio who can teach the Yoga Sutra, or to yoga studies, which is a very expensive thing to engage in the sense that most of the yoga studies scholars are in university classrooms. You have to enroll at a university. Whereas we're able to offer this through our nonprofit platform, where we offer all levels of study, all the way from certificate level courses such as this one that I'm teaching, all the way up to graduate degrees in these various fields and subfields, including yoga studies. And so part of what this is an invitation, again, 4 years later, for those who I've been talking to, people like you, Agni, who are taking it right now, to come back into the classroom with me and re-engage in the very deep and transformative discussions of this text, and to once again interpret it anew, just like the commentators have been doing for thousands of years. We're bringing the same interpretive lens back into the text, but from our contemporary perspective, understanding why it still matters.
Another thing that I don't know if I've seen anyone talk about this when it comes to yoga studies and yoga teacher trainings, is that the more quality the course is, the better network of people you meet. I have some very dear friends, and I've had career opportunities as a result of the quality of the content that Arihanta is putting out. So I would just say that your network of people, like even if it's a small class, these are people who are the exact right people to meet because they are interested in the things that you are. And they are living in a way that is inspirational. I mean, I don't want to name names, but like I have several wonderful friends as a result of my time with Arihanta.
I'm really happy to hear that. Yeah, we create such a community of people who really care about the world, care about others, care about animals, care about so many social justice issues. And it is such a kind of nurturing and wonderful experience. And, what's interesting is we end up meeting these people in person at some point in our lives. I know that this year I'll be meeting several of you for the first time after studying with you for years. And I'm really looking forward to that. And it really has put us in touch with such an incredible online and in-person community of yoga teachers and activists and scholars. So I just
From
want to
all over the
second
world. From
from
all
all
over the
over the
world.
world.
It's amazing. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Sorry, I kind of stepped on your sentence. You were saying?
That was it. No, I just wanted to kind of thank you for noting that, and it certainly has been my experience. And what keeps me coming back to teaching this and other courses is you and the students that you're speaking of who are dedicated to their studies and also to making the world a better place.
And to sharing their own time. I text with these people, we're friends, and if I like we ask each other questions, and it's just it surpasses anything that you could learn, online or on ChatGPT. So, in popular culture today, especially in the sort of activist, the organizer, the social justice world, um, I have noticed there is a criticism of any kind of self-care because the criticism goes that our society needs to change and that we shouldn't talk about self-care so much and we shouldn't give it airtime because the real problem is our society, not how we cope with life. What would you say in response to that narrative and in regards to studying Patanjali?
I can say, I think, first of all, from my experience, that I hear this a lot as well. And this critique of self care in a world that is kind of falling apart and needs so much repair. And my response to that is always, personally, as well as when I speak to students, is that yoga does not necessarily mean that we disengage with the world permanently to go into kind of navel gazing self care of or privileged self care. We're all, I think, just scrapping through the world, trying to make it through amidst all of the things that are happening all around us all the time that we want to change. And we often feel like we can't change, although we can. We do have the power to make change big and small. And the way that I teach yoga and the way that it's been interpreted by a lot of scholars and a lot of practitioners, especially activist practitioners, is that self-care, that going inward, that finding moments for peace, for joy, and for even just regulation of our nervous system by breathing together, for example. Those kind of practices, those self-care techniques are always done with a spirit of recovering ourselves to be able to more fully and adequately engage with the world around us, compassionately, non-violently, living a simple life and just trying to do things that improve the communities we live in, improve our families, make family life easier, help us address some of the big structural issues that we have in society. We can't do all that, and I often see it happen with burnout, with activist
Mm.
burnout, with family burnout, with whatever. We have to have those moments for self-care, and so the way that I teach it is always through that lens of avoiding burnout, which happens, as we know, across so many ranges of people who are trying to make the world better. I see it happen in academia a lot, where academics get so overstimulated and dysregulated, and I think to myself that I love the work that they're doing. I love the work that we're all doing. And it helps when we're doing that kind of work to have these tools, as well as the worldview that the Yoga Sutra provides, to give us some solace amidst the suffering of the world, which, as I mentioned before, is precisely what Patanjali is trying to do. And you asked me about his main message earlier. At the beginning of the text in the second sutra, it says that yoga is the restraint of the mind, essentially, of the thoughts and the fluctuations of the mind. Our mind, if we sit with it for any period of time, especially those who are involved in various social engagements and activism and advocacy, know that your mind can just run so much anxiety and terror through you. And part of Patanjali's goal here with everything I've told you is to help you gain an understanding of how the mind works, regulate it through somatic practices so that you will be able to engage the world even more powerfully. So I think that those are that's my response to this critique that yoga is kind of just merely a form of self-care when we need to be out in the world. I think it should serve the worldly means. It should make us better in the world.
It certainly has for me, and I think it's funny because I am known in my community for how much work I do. And when people ask me about that, I tell them about yoga, meditation, and actually vegan praxis. I say, this is where I get my energy. This is why I don't burn out. Everybody has moments of burnout, but I think sometimes people want to hear a sexier answer than yoga and meditation, but it's true. It's provided me, like you said, solace, comfort, but also energy and inspiration. And I guess that leads to my last question. So, as you know, my heart is with that isolated yogi, that person that, like in my case, lives in a remote area or they don't live near a city and they maybe can't afford to spend a lot of money and time on academic training. They're isolated due to their circumstances or socioeconomic factors. A lot of YTTs have sprung up since COVID. How does a remote student who's trying to figure out what program to enroll in, how do they ascertain whether it's a good investment?
I think there's probably at least two things for someone like this to think about. Is a remote program a good investment for a remote student, especially if they're resource restrained? It's very important for them to consider if, one, the credentials are good for the people who are teaching it, as well as the inclusivity of the particular program that they're looking into. So, with regard to credentials, there are the yoga teacher training and online workshop is completely saturated, as we know. There's so many calls for attention, flashy things. A lot of grifting goes along with that online, right? Which is kind of sad. People are just inundated with messaging about yoga training. And so with regard to credentials, I think students should look at the credentials of the teachers who are teaching. Where have they trained? Who have they trained with? What is their lineage? What university? What advisors have they studied with? What have they published? Read some of their writing to see if it resonates with you. What experience do they have, not only in teaching, but in lived yogic practice and experience? So I think those things should be looked at. And of course, we know that there's a lot of issues with abuse that have taken place. There's a lot of grifting online to try to make money from yoga simply to make money. If that's the end goal, then that is problematic, of course. And so these kind of credentials are important. The background of the people teaching need to be considered very, very carefully. And the second thing I think, and of course, price is part of this, is inclusivity, right? So inclusivity, I mean that in a lot of ways. With regard to price, does it price them out, or is it priced in such a way that they are not able to not afford this? Then they shouldn't take it if they cannot afford it, right? Also, what values do the teachers themselves espouse, the people who are teaching it, and the students, right? So it's nice that you're interviewing the Agni because you're one of our wonderful
Mm.
graduate students, and people can find you online as well and
Mhm.
learn about your values and everything that you've said here on the podcast. So really think like the values people espouse, how do those values align with the people who are searching for a yoga teacher training? Look at the people who are teaching it. It's very important, as well as the people who are interested in taking the class and the community built around it. Oftentimes there can be exclusivity through pricing, through all kinds of ways that people are excluded from things. It's very important to know if the course is trying to target a wealthy demographic, or is it priced in such a way that it makes the knowledge more open and democratized, as it should be, as any yoga teacher should hopefully be able to do. And at the same time, I understand that yoga teachers have to make money. This is totally understandable. I'm not putting that down. And as we said before, even in pre-modern yoga, all the way into the present, profit has been part of the game. We are lucky as a nonprofit institution at Arihanta Institute that we have the support of donors and other supporters and grants that make it possible for us to offer the offerings that we have from scholars, from top practitioners who are in our communities like you, and teachers who are able to offer these offerings at a very reasonable cost. And so I just put that out there, that I think credentials are important, and so is inclusivity. These are two very important ways of thinking about what is this yoga program, any yoga program online, worth it to me?
I guess I wanted to remark, I have taken a handful of trainings, and one of them had kind of all of the right buzzwords and like around diversity and values. And it was the worst of all that I've taken because it looked like it was values oriented, but it really was that sort of churn. And there was no one-on-one time with anyone at all. And that really made me step back and try to think, well, how would I know if a program is good or not? And one of the things that I encountered from the very first time I started taking courses with Arihanta was how responsive the professors were to questions. And I'll just tell one short story. This would have been a couple of years ago. I wasn't sure if I had the ability to study Sanskrit, and I reached out to Professor Bohannik, and he responded with the most thoughtful email. Like, it wasn't a short email, and it was such, I mean, I think that that was a huge turning point in whether I was going to invest with Arianta because, of course, didn't know anybody yet. So I have found that you are responsive to students asking questions. The course itself has something like 10, is it 10 live Q&As where everyone gets time with you live, not pre-recorded. To me, those are the things students should look for is, do you have access to a professor or teacher who is going to listen to you and respond to you? Because even 45 minutes is a tremendous value of time for someone who is a yoga scholar. So I just wanted to offer that personal experience, that that is something that has really impressed me, and that I feel like Arihanta still offers at a high standard.
Yeah, thanks for saying that. I think that's a very practical, important point. And that the fact that you've experienced from multiple professors at our institute really illustrates our commitment, definitely, to not just offering courses online. I mean, we have self-study courses that people take, but also for those who want that live engagement, we are available not only in the classroom itself, as you mentioned, during weekly study sessions for these courses, including the one on the Yoga Sutra, but also available via email. We end up becoming friends with people and mentoring them through social media and all other kinds of places. It's really incredible how fast the message spreads and how we are able to stay in communication with all of you, because we all work remotely, and it's become our life. It's how we stay in touch. And then the best part is after interacting and learning from each other for so many years is when we actually get to meet each other in person. So yes, we are very much available and very responsive as professors, and I'm glad to hear that you've also had that experience.
Yeah, in no way am I trying to crowd your inbox or anything like that, and I've tried to reach out judiciously because I know how busy all the professors are, but I just think that time is the most valuable thing we can give one another, and Arihanta has a really high standard there. So, I guess as we're kind of winding up, we can share the details of the course, but I wanted to know if there's anything else that you would like to that we haven't touched on that you'd like to share.
I just want to thank you, first of all, Agni, one of our graduate students, for interviewing me for this and for sharing your experience with the course. I think, and in my intuition is that if others study with me the way you have, they will also have a similarly, hopefully, transformative experience. This text has been incredibly transformative for me since the beginning of my yoga studies over 15 years ago, and remains kind of an anchor for me all the way into the present. So I invite those who are interested in studying the depths and penetrating the depths of yoga philosophy to reach out to me to learn more about the Yoga Sutra and potentially even just enroll in this course. We're going to be teaching it 10 live sessions, as you mentioned, starting on September 4th, 2026. And that's going to go on for 10 weeks, where we will have courses, live sessions, and also self study in between for you to learn the text and come interact and engage directly with me live every week.
Well, thank you so much. I will, of course, see you there. I have a busy fall semester, but I wouldn't miss this live opportunity for the world. And I just want to say to anyone listening that this course, you can study it multiple times and you will always get more out of it. It's just been phenomenal. It's also offered, it's a collegiate level course, and it's offered it at reduced tuition through grant and donor support. And that's a huge opportunity. So I hope people perceive that opportunity and take advantage of it. And I want to thank you for all that you do. And I want to thank you for building a program where anyone in the world can actually study something this quality and at this depth. I just appreciate it. There's no way I could physically go to a place of study for any length of time. So this has been phenomenal.
Thank you, Agni, and thanks once again for interviewing me.
Thank you for listening to the Engaged Jain Studies Podcast, brought to you by Arihanta Institute, an IRC 501c3 nonprofit California corporation. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform, or better yet, tell a friend and share it with a colleague. At Arihanta Institute, we bridge ancient wisdom with contemporary living through accessible, self-paced online courses, free events, and a first-of-its-kind Master of Arts program in Engaged Jain Studies. Visit arihantainstitute.org to learn how our curriculum spanning Jain philosophy, social justice, veganism, environmental studies, and more can enrich your understanding of timeless principles in today's context. Jai Jinendra.